welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be talking about spirituality and marijuana. We're going to be doing a little bit of a updated video to one of my first videos that I've ever made on my YouTube channel. Everyone say hi to Nugget. Yeah. So what I'm going to be talking about today is how to effectively use marijuana in your spiritual practice, and also we're going to be going over kind of what happens when you start to vibrate at a higher frequency than marijuana, and a little bit about like the cons of long-term marijuana use, and just kind of getting a full well-rounded view on this topic, at least a little bit more well-rounded than it was in my previous video. It's been about, maybe 2 years, maybe a year and a half since the last video, so I've kind of just grown a lot. I've developed a lot with my spirituality, and I've learned some new things about my marijuana use, how I use marijuana, how other people use marijuana. The things that I'll be going over today is basically mainly from my point of view and my experience, but I have talked to other people that have said similar things to what I'm going to be talking about, and I've learned from other people on like YouTube as well. Let's dive right into this. In my previous video about this, I did talk a little bit more about the history of marijuana, so if that's something you're interested in, you can go ahead and go back to that video, but I'll just briefly touch on it. Marijuana was originated mostly in Japan and China, and it was always revered as an uplifting thing. It wasn't really stigmatized until it was around 1910 when the governments like banned drugs, like all drugs all around, and it wasn't until about 1930 that took effect in America. It's theorized that because of the criminalization of marijuana and other drugs, this is what had led to a lot of the stigma behind using marijuana to begin with. In the previous video, I also talked about how marijuana can help you get into a meditative space and how it can help raise your vibration in order to help you connect easier to like your spirits, your guides, to whoever you believe in, whatever form of spiritual practice. It does uplift your energy to a certain point. I have the scale of consciousness that I drew up here. And you can see that it starts really low at 20 with like shame, guilt, apathy. And then up here at the top, we have love, joy, peace, enlightenment. And so marijuana is going to bring you up to that state of love. But what happens when you start to vibrate higher than this and you keep using weed? I want to get into this in just a moment. So when we look at this chart, we can see how marijuana would be very helpful, especially when you're existing in these lower vibrations here. A lot of my life I existed in these lower vibrations, but through spirituality, my spirituality has helped me raise my vibration. Marijuana has helped me in so many ways when it comes to my spiritual path, whether that be aiding with my anxiety when I know I'm going to go into a public setting, or when it helps me get into a meditative space when my mind is racing, or when my depression is just hitting me so hard and I need something to just cradle me a little bit. And I have noticed that through my years of using marijuana, it's been about 5 years now, that maybe I have used it a little bit too much, and my perception of it and the way that I interact with it has actually changed quite a bit from when I first started my spiritual journey to now, which would be about 2 years since my big spiritual awakening. I've always been a pretty spiritual person even as a kid, but I did have a really huge spiritual awakening a couple years ago. I've noticed that the more I'm on my healing journey and I'm doing shadow work and I'm putting myself first and I'm finding my authenticity, all of these things are raising my vibrations, and I don't really need the marijuana anymore to raise my vibrations for me because I'm already vibrating at a higher level. So what I want to talk about now is how has marijuana affected me after vibrating at a higher frequency than it vibrates at. And again, I just want to reiterate that this is just mostly from like my point of view, but I have talked to a lot of other spiritual marijuana users, as well as like listened to people online as well about their experiences. But yeah, so let's see. So sometimes what I've noticed that'll happen is I'm like sitting at this higher frequency. I've had a great day and I want, a bowl of weed to relax. So I'll go and I'll have that. But what I've noticed is that sometimes I can feel it actually bringing my vibration down. And it actually has started making me a little bit sadder, which is the opposite reaction than what I've always had to weed before, which actually threw me for a pretty big loop because I was like, what's going on? But I started to realize that my relationship with marijuana wasn't always going to be the same way forever, that it changes as I change, and it changes based off of how I use it. I've heard a lot of longtime marijuana users say that after a few years it starts to affect them differently, and I definitely can relate to that because I've started feeling a little bit more anxious. If I've smoked too much, I get very anxious, and like I was saying, sometimes it'll make me sad just because I've already been vibrating at that higher frequency. Also, it can make me lazy. Sometimes weed can, especially like depending on the strain or whatever, it can make some people very lazy. So I think it's important to just know how your body interacts with marijuana, and know how your mind interacts with marijuana as well. We also have to be careful when there becomes a dependence on it as well. For a while it was like I couldn't meditate without getting high first because I needed to like be in that state, but I can do it without it. You can do it without it. It's just we need to be careful about becoming dependent on it because it is a drug. It's a mind altering substance. It's plant medicine, and it shouldn't be overused, and it should be used in a way that is sacred to you and sacred to your spiritual path. So you could also get like physical symptoms as well. I know this isn't part of like spirituality or what, well, I mean, yeah, it kind of is, right? Like your body and your spirit and everything is all connected. So like I noticed that it's really hard for me to eat food sometimes unless I've smoked before, and that's pretty irritating. Also, there's CHS, which is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome. I hope I am saying that right, but it's just like the long-term use of that can lead to some things that can just mess you up internally, just physically, especially when it comes to like eating schedules and appetite and stuff. This is just a short and sweet little video, so the last thing that I wanted to talk about was actually psychosis. And it's something that I've heard a lot of people in the spiritual community have experienced. It's something that I personally have experienced. So the definition of psychosis is an abnormal condition of the mind that results in difficulties determining what is real. And it can have symptoms like delusions, hallucinations, extreme dissociation, in the most extreme cases, unaliving ideations. You can also be things like sleep problems and social withdrawal and lack of motivation. And psychosis is no fun. It is not something that anybody wants to go through. It's extremely disorienting. And it can be extremely dangerous when in the right mindset. So that's something that we have to be aware of, because long-term use of marijuana or any drug can oftentimes lead to psychosis. And especially being in like the spiritual community, it's something that we have to be aware of as well, because sometimes for me at least, it's hard for me to stay grounded. And when I'm not grounded, it makes I'm mentally ill. I'm mentally ill and I'm spiritual. So I have to make sure that my mental health is right. Otherwise, if I'm using too much, if I'm high too often, it definitely can lead to psychosis, which can be dangerous and really scary. So yeah, that's why grounding exercises and practices are so important, especially when using plant medicine. You definitely want to make sure that you're grounded and you're in a right headspace. And I think that plant medicine is so amazing and it can be used for so many different things, but it's so important to really check in with ourselves and to understand how we interact with the plant medicine that we're using, and how, like, the relationship that you have with the plant medicine, and really honoring that and holding that as sacred, because that's exactly what it is. And just like a lot of spiritual practices, we use herbs for their magical properties. Well, we have to remember that marijuana is an herb and it has magical properties as well, and we can use that for our benefit. So definitely make sure that you are setting intentions while using marijuana. I think that plant medicine and spirituality really can complement each other very nicely, but we just definitely have to be aware of how it's affecting us, and to keep 2 feet on the ground and to be grounded too, because it's easy to get lost in spirituality in general. And not that that's a bad thing, it's just when we focus too much on what's on our spirituality, or like what's outside of ourselves, or like it takes us away from the present. And being in the present for me is the biggest part about my spiritual journey, because if I can be in the present, then I am really appreciating everything and living the way that I believe I intended to when I decided to come here. So yeah, I don't really have anything else to say. That was pretty much it, but thank you guys for being here, and thank you guys for still being here, even though my posting schedule is all over the place and I make videos whenever I want. Yeah. Oh, don't I? Yeah. All right. I love you guys. Have a beautiful day. All right.